For nearly 2 weeks, investigators publicly admitted they had no suspects, no persons of interest, and no clear explanation for how 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie vanished from her own home. Then, just before midnight on February 13th, the silence broke. A line of unmarked vehicles rolled into a quiet Tucson neighborhood less than 2 miles from her front door. Red and blue lights reflected off darkened windows. Armed officers moved quickly, surrounding a single house that had suddenly become the center of a federal investigation. Inside, 3 individuals were detained and questioned as agents searched for answers in one of the most mysterious disappearances in recent memory. Authorities confirmed the operation was connected directly to the case. A judge had approved a federal warrant after investigators uncovered a critical lead. But hours later, everything changed. By sunrise, no arrests had been announced. Everyone had been released. So what was discovered inside that home? Why did investigators act so aggressively only to walk away? And what does it reveal about what really happened the night Nancy disappeared? Because what investigators are uncovering now suggests this was never a random crime. The truth may be far closer than anyone believes. And time is running out for everyone involved now. Here today now. Nancy Ellen Guthrie had lived a life defined by routine. For more than 50 years, her days followed familiar patterns inside the quiet Catalina foothills neighborhood north of Tucson. She woke early. She took her medication. She spoke regularly with her children. She rarely traveled far from home. Friends described her as cautious, someone who valued safety and predictability. At 84 years old, stability was not just comfort. It was necessity. She had moved to Arizona in the early 1970s, raising her family after the sudden death of her husband, Charles, who never returned from a mining expedition in Mexico. The loss forced Nancy to adapt. She became independent out of obligation, not choice. Over time, that independence became part of her identity. Even as her body weakened, her mind remained sharp. Those closest to her said she noticed everything. But physical limitations had begun to shape her daily life. Walking required effort. She depended on medication to regulate her heart and blood pressure. Her pacemaker transmitted health data directly to her phone. Her children worried about her living alone, but Nancy insisted. That house was more than property. It was memory. On the evening of January 31st, nothing appeared unusual. Nancy spent hours with her family, laughing, eating, and talking about ordinary things. There were no signs of fear, no indication that danger was already moving toward her. At 9:48 p.m., a rideshare vehicle dropped her off in her driveway. Security records later confirmed the garage door opened, then closed minutes later. Nancy was home, safe, or so everyone believed. What happened next remains the moment everything changed. At 1:47 a.m., her front door camera disconnected. The interruption lasted only seconds, but it was enough to raise questions. Devices do not simply fail without reason. Something had interfered with it. Something deliberate. At 2:12 a.m., the system registered motion. The figure approached slowly. Recovered image fragments later showed the outline of a person moving toward the entrance. Their face was hidden behind a mask. Their hands were covered. Their movements were controlled, calm. There was no hesitation. Whoever stood at that door did not appear lost. They appeared expected. Investigators would later focus on that detail. People who act without hesitation often act with knowledge. The individual paused near the camera. They reached upward. Then the image ended. Inside the house, no alarm sounded. No emergency call was placed. No signal was sent requesting help. Nancy Guthrie vanished without a trace. Morning arrived without warning signs. Family members assumed she was resting. Hours passed before concern began to grow. Phone calls went unanswered. Messages remained unread. When relatives arrived at the home, they found something deeply unsettling. Nancy was gone. Her bed showed signs of use. Personal belongings remained in place. Her phone was still inside. There was no indication she had left voluntarily. People do not abandon essential medication. People do not disappear without preparation. Police were notified. Officers arrived. They searched the property. They asked questions no one could answer. There were no witnesses, no forced entry, no obvious struggle. But investigators understood something immediately. Absence itself can be evidence, as hours became days. Federal authorities joined the investigation. Specialists reviewed electronic data, security logs, and communication records. They reconstructed Nancy's final known movements minute by minute. What they discovered suggested planning, not impulse. Someone had chosen that night. Someone had chosen her. Surveillance requests were issued across the neighborhood. Residents were asked to provide camera footage. Vehicles were analyzed. Movement patterns were mapped. Every detail mattered, because somewhere inside those details was a mistake. And mistakes reveal truth. As the investigation expanded, a disturbing possibility emerged. Nancy had not simply disappeared, she had been taken. By someone who believed they could do it without being seen. By someone who believed no one would notice until it was too late. They were wrong, because every action leaves a trace, even the ones meant to remain invisible. And investigators were only beginning to uncover what happened. In the darkness that night, as investigators examined the property, they began to notice what was missing as much as what remained. There were no signs of forced entry. Doors were closed. Windows were intact. Nothing appeared broken. Nothing appeared disturbed. It was as if whoever entered that home had done so without resistance. That detail narrowed possibilities immediately. It suggested access. It suggested confidence. It suggested the person did not fear being stopped. Inside, forensic teams worked methodically. They photographed every surface. They collected fibers invisible to the human eye. They searched for prints, skin cells, anything left behind unintentionally. Because even the most careful person leaves something. And eventually, they found it.DNA. It did not belong to Nancy. It did not belong to her family. It belonged to someone else. Someone who had been inside that house the night she disappeared. That discovery changed the direction of the investigation. Now there was proof. Physical proof that another person had been present. Physical proof that Nancy had not simply vanished on her own. The question was no longer whether someone had entered. The question was WHO. At the same time, digital forensic specialists were analyzing Nancy's security system. Devices that appeared empty often contained fragments of information stored beyond normal access. Hidden records, temporary caches, residual data. What they recovered provided the first visual confirmation. A masked individual standing at her door. The person wore dark clothing designed to conceal identity. Gloves covered their hands. A backpack rested on their shoulders. Their posture remained steady. Their movements precise. They did not rush. They did not panic. They acted with purpose. Behavioral analysts working alongside the Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately recognized what that meant. This was not random. This was preparation. People who commit impulsive crimes show urgency. They move quickly. They hesitate. They react. This individual did none of those things. They approached slowly. They concealed the camera. They controlled the environment. They behaved like someone who had done this before, or someone who had spent significant time planning it. Investigators began tracing every element visible in the footage. Clothing type, body proportions, movement patterns. Even the backpack itself became a focus. Because objects can identify people. Mass-produced items still leave trails. Purchase records, store locations, security cameras. Somewhere, someone had sold that bag. Somewhere, someone had seen that person. And someone might remember. Meanwhile, the timeline surrounding Nancy's disappearance revealed another disturbing detail. Her pacemaker monitoring system stopped transmitting data shortly after the suspected time of entry. That meant her phone had been moved or disabled or taken. Medical devices do not stop functioning without reason. Something had interrupted it. Family members struggled to understand how this could happen without warning. Nancy was careful. She was alert. She did not open her door to strangers late at night, which meant one of two things had occurred. She had been forced or she had been deceived. Both possibilities carried terrifying implications. Public appeals began immediately. Her daughter, Savannah Guthrie, asked for help. She spoke directly to whoever might have information. Her voice remained steady, But emotion broke through. She wanted answers. She wanted her mother back. But investigators needed more than emotion. They needed evidence. Tips began to arrive. Thousands of them. Some useful, many not. Every name had to be checked. Every claim verified. Because false leads waste time. And time was the one thing Nancy did not have. Her medical condition meant survival depended on regular treatment. Without it, her body would weaken. Without it, risk increased with every passing hour. Search teams expanded their radius. They examined roads, desert areas, abandoned structures. Helicopters scanned terrain from above. Officers knocked on doors asking questions that residents could not answer. Most people had seen nothing. Most people had heard nothing, but silence itself was suspicious, because crimes like this rarely occur without someone noticing something unusual, a vehicle, a sound, a shadow, something out of place. Investigators believed someone nearby knew more than they realized, because criminals rely on invisibility. They rely on people ignoring small details. They rely on normalcy, but normalcy had already been broken. That an elderly woman was gone, taken from the place she trusted most, and somewhere beyond the reach of cameras and search teams. The person responsible was watching the investigation unfold, watching every report, listening to every appeal, waiting, because as long as they remained unidentified, they remained free. But the evidence was growing, the timeline was narrowing, and investigators were moving closer to understanding exactly what happened inside that house after 2:12 a.m., closer to identifying the person behind the mask, closer to discovering where Nancy had been taken, and closer to confronting the individual who believed they had committed the perfect crime. By the second week, the investigation had shifted. Detectives were no longer asking whether a crime had occurred. They were asking who had done it. Evidence collected from inside and outside the home was being processed at multiple laboratories. Each sample carried possibility. Each test carried risk. Because science does not speculate, confirms. And confirmation would point to a person who had stood inside Nancy's home during her final known moments, alive that night, there, then, now, here, today. Attention turned toward the surrounding neighborhood. Officers revisited streets they had already searched. They spoke again to residents who had nothing new to add. But repetition matters. Memories change. Details emerge. A vehicle parked slightly out of place. A light turning on unexpectedly. A sound dismissed at the time but remembered later. Investigators documented everything. Patterns began forming. Movement timelines overlapped. And slowly, a map of activity surrounding the disappearance began to take shape, now clearly visible to them all. Several miles away, discarded items were recovered along a roadside. They appeared ordinary at first glance, but forensic teams recognized their potential significance. Objects do not travel alone. They are carried. They are dropped. They are left behind. Laboratory analysis would determine whether those items carried biological traces, whether they connected to the unknown individual seen in the footage, whether they could finally transform suspicion into identification and identification into accountability and truth for investigators watching silently nearby tonight. Now, rumors began spreading beyond law enforcement. Messages arrived claiming knowledge of what had happened. Some demanded money. Others offered vague information impossible to verify. Investigators treated each one seriously. Even deception can reveal motive. Even lies can expose proximity. Because those who fabricate stories often stand closer to truth than they realize. Analysts compared language, timing, and origin points. Every communication became another piece in a puzzle still missing its central image completely for them to solve soon enough. Now, then came the operation that changed everything. Under darkness, tactical units moved toward a specific address. The decision had not been made lightly. Judges require justification. Warrants require evidence. Something had convinced investigators that answers might be waiting inside that house. Individuals present were detained and questioned. Rooms were searched. Property was examined. But detention does not equal guilt. Creates opportunity. Opportunity to compare statements, reactions, and forensic results against the growing body of evidence collected that night there. News of the search spread quickly. Cameras gathered outside police lines. Reporters spoke carefully, repeating only confirmed facts. The public wanted certainty. Investigators could offer none, because investigations move slower than speculation. Evidence must be processed, conclusions must be defended, and mistakes must be avoided. By morning, those detained were no longer in custody. But release does not erase suspicion. It simply reflects that proof has not yet reached the legal threshold required for formal charges against anyone involved here. For the family of Nancy Guthrie, waiting became its own form of suffering. Every phone call carried possibility. Every unknown number carried hope and fear together. They spoke publicly, urging anyone with knowledge to come forward. Their message remained simple. Someone knows something. Someone has seen something. Silence protects the guilty. Truth protects the innocent. And somewhere, beyond cameras and microphones, the person responsible was living another ordinary day unnoticed somewhere nearby, hidden from everyone watching closely right now today. The investigation led by the Federal Bureau of Investigation continued expanding. Databases were searched, travel records reviewed, digital footprints reconstructed. Analysts asked the same question repeatedly: where do preparation and opportunity intersect? Because that intersection is where offenders emerge. Profiles were developed, possibilities prioritized, resources allocated accordingly. The individual seen approaching the door had believed concealment was enough. But concealment fades, and when it does, identity remains exposed beneath actions already committed forever in time ahead for them all now. As days passed, pressure increased. Rewards were offered. Tip lines remained open. Investigators trusted that persistence would succeed where secrecy had failed, because maintaining a secret requires control, and control weakens over time. People talk, they confide, they make mistakes. One conversation can change everything. One detail can unlock truth. And when that moment arrives, the distance between unknown suspect and identified offender disappears completely without warning for anyone involved watching quietly from shadows nearby tonight, right now, here today. What remains certain is simple. Nancy Guthrie was taken. The person responsible believed they would never be identified. They believed preparation guaranteed escape. But investigations do not end because offenders hope they will. They end when evidence speaks, and evidence never forgets. Somewhere, in records, in data, or in memory, the final answer already exists. Investigators only need to find it. And when they do, the silence surrounding her disappearance will finally end for good this time ahead now to date. If you know anything about what happened to Nancy Guthrie, contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation at 1-800-CALL-FBI or the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. Even the smallest detail could make the difference. If you want continued updates and verified facts, subscribe to this channel now. We are monitoring this investigation closely. Nancy Guthrie is missing, answers exist, and sooner or later, someone will reveal the truth to everyone watching this case unfold, right now today, here for justice and closure ahead.